A peaceful afternoon at the park. A little black girl in a wheelchair admires flowers and enjoys a tranquil moment. Suddenly, a white man approaches her with an angry expression, hurling cruel words and shoving her out of her wheelchair. The unjust act captures the attention of everyone nearby, and the park's serene atmosphere turns tense, until a loud voice pierces through the chaos. In that instant, the man realizes he has made a grave mistake. It was a sunny afternoon in the heart of the city's largest park. The air was warm and fresh, filled with the sounds of rustling leaves, chirping birds, and the distant laughter of children playing. Families spread out on picnic blankets under the shade of tall oak trees, and couples strolled hand in hand along winding pathways. The atmosphere was lively, yet peaceful, an oasis amidst the usual chaos of urban life. Near a grassy clearing, a little girl sat in her wheelchair, her small hands gently gripping the rims of its wheels as she maneuvered carefully across the soft green lawn. Her name was Maya, a bright and curious 9-year-old with deep brown eyes that sparkled with excitement. Today, she wore a cheerful yellow dress that contrasted beautifully with her dark curls, which were tied back with a bright pink ribbon. A book rested on her lap, one she had brought along to read while waiting for her father to return. Maya's father, Officer James Carter, had stepped away to buy her favorite treat, a double-scoop strawberry ice cream cone, from a nearby vendor. Despite being off duty, James always carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who knew how to handle any situation. Before leaving, he had reminded Maya to stay where she was and promised he'd be back in just a few minutes. Maya didn't mind waiting. She loved the park, the way the sunlight filtered through the trees, the sounds of children's laughter, and the sense of freedom it gave her. Though she couldn't run and play like the other kids, she had her own way of exploring the world. As she rolled her chair gently over the grass, she tilted her head back to feel the warmth of the sun on her face and closed her eyes, savoring the simple joys of the moment. Nearby, a family played frisbee, their joyful shouts blending harmoniously with the ambient noise of the park. Maya watched them with a small smile, her heart light with happiness. Every now and then, she glanced down the path her father had taken, eager for his return but completely at ease in her surroundings. A few passers-by noticed her and smiled warmly, their faces reflecting kindness. Maya had always been the kind of child who drew positive attention. Her presence was uplifting, a small reminder of resilience and joy to anyone who took the time to notice her. She waved at a toddler who toddled by with a balloon in hand, and the little one giggled, waving back before being whisked away by their parent. As she paused near a cluster of wildflowers, Maya reached out to touch a delicate yellow bloom. Her fingers brushed the petals softly, as if afraid of hurting them. A group of butterflies fluttered past, and she watched them intently, her face glowing with wonder. It was a moment of pure tranquility, the kind of scene that seemed almost too perfect to disturb. But unbeknownst to Maya, not everyone in the park shared her peaceful outlook. Far across the lawn, a figure approached a man whose presence seemed out of place amidst the cheerful atmosphere. His strides were sharp and purposeful, his face marked by a stern scowl that contrasted sharply with the joy around him. Though Maya couldn't see him yet, his arrival would soon cast a shadow over the serenity of her day. For now, though, Maya remained blissfully unaware, lost in her appreciation of the park's beauty. She adjusted her position in the wheelchair slightly, ensuring she wouldn't accidentally crush the flowers beneath her wheels. With a soft hum, she began to turn her chair back toward the bench where her father had left her, eager to show him the flowers she had discovered. The warm sunlight bathed her in a golden glow, and her laughter rang out softly as a butterfly landed briefly on her hand before flitting away. It was a moment of joy, fleeting and delicate, one that would soon be challenged by a harsh and unexpected reality. Maya was happily rolling her wheelchair back toward the bench where her father had told her to wait, the warm sun on her back and the delicate fragrance of the wildflowers lingering in the air. Her thoughts drifted to the ice cream her dad was bringing, her favorite flavor, strawberry, which always made her smile. She imagined the sweetness melting on her tongue and couldn't help but giggle softly to herself. Just as she reached the edge of the grassy clearing, she noticed a figure coming toward her. At first, she didn't think much of it. After all, many people passed by her in the park, and most of them would either nod or smile politely before continuing on their way. But this man was different. He was tall and middle-aged, dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark slacks. His neatly combed hair and polished shoes suggested he was someone who cared about appearances. However, the deep frown etched across his face and the sharpness in his gaze immediately set him apart from the friendly faces Maya had encountered earlier. As the man drew closer, Maya began to feel uneasy. His eyes were locked on her, his expression hard and unforgiving. There was no warmth in his demeanor, only irritation, perhaps even anger. Instinctively, Maya slowed her wheelchair, her small hands gripping the rims tightly, as she tried to understand why he was heading straight toward her. When he was just a few feet away, the man stopped abruptly, towering over her. His shadow fell across Maya, and the sudden change in tone around her was almost palpable. She looked up at him, her bright eyes filled with confusion and a hint of fear. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" The man barked, his voice loud and accusatory, cutting through the pleasant sounds of the park. A few people nearby glanced over, their attention momentarily drawn to the unexpected outburst. Maya blinked, startled by his tone. I'm just sitting here," she replied softly, her voice trembling slightly. She wasn't used to being spoken to this way, especially by a stranger. "Sitting here," he repeated mockingly, his voice rising with each word. "You're rolling that thing," he pointed sharply at her wheelchair, "all over the grass, ruining it for everyone else. This park is for people to enjoy, not for kids like you to destroy with your wheels." Maya's heart sank. She had never thought of her wheelchair as something that could ruin anything. It was simply how she moved through the world, her constant companion in a life that sometimes felt full of limitations. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes as she tried to process his cruel words. "I didn't mean to ruin anything," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was just looking at the flowers." But her quiet response only seemed to anger the man further. He took a step closer, his face reddening with frustration. "Flowers? Do you think the flowers will keep growing if kids like you keep tearing up the grass? This is why parks get ruined, because people like you don't think about the consequences." Maya recoiled slightly, her small hands clutching the armrests of her wheelchair as if they could somehow shield her from his harsh words. Around them, the park had grown quieter. More people were starting to notice the commotion, their curious gazes lingering on the scene unfolding before them. The man's anger reached a boiling point. Without warning, he reached out and grabbed the handles of Maya's wheelchair. With a forceful shove, he pushed it backward, causing the chair to tilt dangerously before toppling over onto its side. Maya tumbled to the ground, landing on the soft grass with a thud. Her arms instinctively moved to shield herself, and her breath hitched as she tried to hold back her sobs. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. The cheerful laughter that had filled the park just moments ago was replaced by a stunned silence. People froze in their tracks, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. Some pulled out their phones, capturing the incident on video, while others exchanged worried glances, unsure of how to react. Maya lay on the ground, her body trembling as tears streamed down her cheeks. She looked up at the man, who stood over her with an air of self-righteousness, his hands on his hips and his chest puffed out, as if he had done something noble. "This is what happens when you don't follow the rules," he declared loudly, his voice echoing across the clearing. "Maybe now you'll think twice before disrespecting this park." Just then, a figure burst onto the scene. A man who had been jogging nearby had witnessed the entire confrontation and could no longer stay silent. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a simple t-shirt and athletic shorts, his face flushed from exertion. His expression was a mix of anger and disbelief as he strode quickly toward the man and Maya. "Hey," the jogger called out, his voice firm and filled with authority. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The man turned to face the jogger, his earlier bravadoing slightly. "I'm teaching her a lesson," he snapped, though his voice lacked the conviction it had moments ago. "She's ruining the park with that wheelchair of hers." The jogger's eyes narrowed, his fists clenching at his sides. "Teaching her a lesson? She's a child. You just assaulted a little girl in front of all these people. What's wrong with you?" The man opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, the jogger stepped closer, his towering presence intimidating. Around them, the crowd that had gathered began to murmur, their voices growing louder as they voiced their disapproval of the man's actions. Maya, still on the ground, wiped her tears with the back of her hand and looked up at the jogger with a glimmer of hope. She didn't know him, but his presence felt like a lifeline, a sign that someone was standing up for her when she needed it most. The confrontation was far from over, and the tension in the park continued to rise. All eyes were on the three figures at the center of the clearing, waiting to see what would happen next. The atmosphere in the park had shifted dramatically. What had once been a scene of carefree joy was now fraught with tension. A crowd had gathered, forming a loose circle around the confrontation, their murmurs of disbelief and outrage growing louder. The jogger, standing protectively in front of Maya, glared at the man who had just shoved her from her wheelchair. "Do you even hear yourself?" the jogger demanded, his voice sharp and cutting through the murmurs. "You're bullying a child, one who's done nothing wrong. Look around you. Everyone here sees what you've done." The man's face reddened, a mix of anger and embarrassment. He straightened his posture, trying to regain control of the situation. "I don't care what anyone thinks," he shot back, his tone defensive. "The rules are the rules. She shouldn't be rolling around on the grass, ruining it for everyone else. Someone has to enforce some discipline." "Discipline?" the jogger repeated incredulously. He gestured toward Maya, who was still on the ground, tears streaking her cheeks. "You call this discipline? You knocked over a little girl in a wheelchair. You don't enforce discipline by attacking someone who can't defend herself. You should be ashamed." The jogger knelt down beside Maya, his demeanor softening as he addressed her. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, his voice calm and reassuring. "Did you get hurt?" Maya sniffled, wiping at her face with trembling hands. I'm okay," she whispered, though her voice wavered with emotion. Her wide eyes darted nervously toward the man who had hurt her, as if she still couldn't believe what had happened. "Don't worry," the jogger said, offering her a comforting smile. "You're safe now. I won't let him hurt you again." The man, seeing the crowd's disapproving stares and sensing his position weakening, crossed his arms over his chest and tried to maintain his defiant stance. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, his voice louder than it needed to be. "She's the one who broke the rules. Why is everyone acting like I'm the bad guy here?" "Because you are the bad guy," someone in the crowd called out, their voice tinged with anger. Another person chimed in, "She's just a kid." "What kind of person does something like this?" The man's eyes darted around nervously as the weight of the crowd's judgment began to press down on him. His earlier confidence was faltering, and his bravado now looked more like desperation. At that moment, another figure emerged from the edge of the clearing, a tall, imposing man in plain clothes, holding 2 ice cream cones in his hands. It was Officer James Carter, Maya's father. His steps quickened as he took in the scene before him. The crowd, his daughter on the ground, her wheelchair tipped over, and the jogger standing protectively beside her. James's heart tightened as he realized what must have happened. His usual calm, collected demeanor gave way to a surge of protective instinct. He handed the ice cream cones to a nearby bystander without a word and strode directly toward his daughter. "Maya," he called, his deep voice carrying a mix of concern and authority. He knelt beside her, his strong hands gently helping her sit upright. "Are you hurt, sweetheart?" "What happened?" Maya's lip quivered as she looked up at him. "Daddy," she began, her voice breaking. "That man, he pushed me. He said I shouldn't be on the grass." James's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he turned to look at the man responsible. His gaze was cold and piercing, filled with an unmistakable fury that he kept tightly controlled. He stood up slowly, his imposing figure casting a long shadow over the man. The man shifted uncomfortably under James's intense stare but tried to salvage his position. "Look, I was just enforcing the rules," he said, his tone defensive. "She shouldn't have been on the grass with that wheelchair. It's against park regulations." "Enforcing the rules," James repeated, his voice dangerously calm. He pulled a badge from his pocket and held it up for the man and everyone else to see. "I'm Officer James Carter, and I know the rules better than anyone. There's nothing in the regulations that says a child in a wheelchair can't roll on the grass." The crowd erupted in murmurs of approval and support. The man's face turned pale as he realized the gravity of the situation. He opened his mouth to speak, but James held up a hand to silence him. "You attacked my daughter," James said, his voice steady but filled with restrained anger. "You knocked her out of her wheelchair, and you humiliated her in front of all these people. That's not enforcing the rules. That's harassment and assault." The man stammered, his confidence completely gone. I didn't mean to hurt her. I was just trying to. Enough, James cut him off, his tone leaving no room for argument. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call. This is Officer Carter. I need assistance at the city park. We have an incident involving an assault on a minor. The suspect is still on the scene. The man's eyes widened in panic as the weight of his actions finally sank in. Wait. This is all a misunderstanding, he protested, his voice trembling. I didn't mean for it to go this far. James ignored him and turned to the jogger, extending a hand. Thank you for stepping in and protecting my daughter, he said sincerely. The jogger shook his hand firmly. It was the right thing to do, he replied. No one should have to go through something like this, especially not a little girl. A few minutes later, the sound of sirens pierced the air, and a police car pulled up near the park entrance. Two uniformed officers approached the scene, their expressions serious as they took in the crowd and the tense atmosphere. James briefed them on the situation, providing a clear and concise account of what had happened. Several bystanders came forward with video footage and witness statements, ensuring that the man's actions were fully documented. The officers placed the man under arrest, escorting him away as the crowd parted to let them through. Some people clapped, while others voiced their support for James and Maya. The man's protests faded into the distance as he was led to the waiting police car. With the situation finally under control, James turned back to Maya. He knelt beside her again, his expression softening as he gently wiped away her tears. It's over now, he said, his voice filled with reassurance. You're safe. Maya nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears. Thank you, Daddy, she whispered, leaning into his embrace. The crowd began to disperse, the park slowly returning to its peaceful rhythm. But for those who had witnessed the event, the memory of a father's unwavering love and a community's support for justice would linger, a powerful reminder of the importance of standing up against cruelty and protecting the vulnerable. As the police car disappeared down the park's winding path, taking the man into custody, the crowd that had gathered began to disperse. Many people lingered, still shaken by the incident, while others approached Officer James Carter and Maya, offering words of support. You're such a brave little girl, an elderly woman said kindly, kneeling beside Maya and patting her hand gently. Don't let anyone make you feel less than what you are, strong and beautiful. Maya smiled timidly, still clutching the armrests of her wheelchair. Her father adjusted the chair back into position and carefully helped her settle into it, his hands steady and reassuring. There you go, sweetheart, he said softly, crouching down to meet her gaze. Everything's all right now. The jogger, who had stood nearby throughout the ordeal, approached them again. Officer Carter, he said, extending a hand once more, I just wanted to say it was an honor stepping in. No one should ever have to face something like that, especially not alone. James shook his hand firmly, his gratitude evident. Thank you for what you did. Not many people have the courage to step up when it matters most. I'm proud to know my daughter wasn't alone before I got here. Maya looked up at the jogger, her small voice breaking through the quiet. Thank you, she whispered, for helping me. The jogger crouched down to her level and smiled warmly. You're welcome, kiddo. You're stronger than you know, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The small exchange brought a sense of closure to the moment, and the jogger gave Maya a playful salute before jogging back toward the path he had come from. Around them, a few remaining bystanders murmured words of encouragement, some leaving behind kind comments like, You're raising a wonderful daughter, officer, or she's such a strong little girl. As the park began to return to its usual rhythm, James noticed a young woman in the crowd who had been holding her phone throughout the incident. She approached him cautiously. Sir, I recorded everything that happened, she said, holding up her phone. I wanted to make sure there was evidence in case no one believed her story. James nodded appreciatively. Thank you, he said. If you could share that footage with the officers, it would help ensure that man is held accountable. The woman smiled and nodded, walking off toward the other officers still gathering statements from witnesses. James felt a renewed sense of faith in the community. Despite the ugliness of what had happened, people had rallied around Maya, showing that kindness and justice could still prevail. Turning back to Maya, James knelt down again, resting his hands gently on her shoulders. Maya, he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, what happened today wasn't your fault. You did absolutely nothing wrong. That man, he was wrong in every way. And I need you to know that what he said about you wasn't true. Maya's eyes glistened with tears, but she nodded. I was just trying to be careful, she said softly. I didn't want to hurt the grass. James smiled gently, his heart swelling with pride at her innocence and thoughtfulness. And you didn't, he assured her. You're the kind of person who makes the world better just by being in it. Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise. Maya leaned forward, wrapping her small arms around her father's neck. I love you, Daddy, she whispered, her voice muffled against his shoulder. I love you too, Maya, James replied, holding her close. He stood up, lifting her gently out of the wheelchair for a moment and spinning her playfully in the air, earning a delighted giggle from her. When he set her back down, her laughter had returned, like sunlight breaking through the clouds after a storm. As James settled Maya back into her wheelchair, a passerby approached with a soft smile. It was a woman holding a colorful bouquet of daisies. I saw what happened, she said gently, crouching down to hand the flowers to Maya. These are for you, sweetheart. You deserve a little extra beauty in your day. Maya accepted the flowers with wide eyes, a smile spreading across her face. Thank you, she said brightly, her spirits visibly lifted. The act of kindness sparked a ripple effect. A man carrying balloons approached next, offering her one in the shape of a star. Then another person came forward with a small box of chocolates they had purchased earlier. In a matter of minutes, Maya was surrounded by tokens of love and support from strangers, each one reminding her that she was valued and cared for. As the park fully settled back into its usual pace, James looked at his daughter, her hands full of flowers and gifts, her face alight with joy once more. He placed a protective hand on her shoulder and smiled. Ready to get that ice cream now? He asked, his voice light and teasing. Maya nodded eagerly. Yes, please. Together, they made their way to the ice cream stand, the crowd parting to let them pass. People waved and smiled, their earlier shock replaced with admiration for the little girl who had faced such adversity with quiet strength. As Maya licked her strawberry ice cream, James reflected on the events of the day. He knew it was a memory neither of them would forget, one that had shown them the worst and best of humanity in the span of an afternoon. He hoped it would teach Maya that for every cruel voice, there were countless kind ones willing to stand up and drown it out. Daddy, Maya said suddenly, breaking him from his thoughts. Yes, sweetheart. Do you think everyone saw what happened because they care? She asked, her tone curious but hopeful. James smiled. I think people care more than we sometimes realize, he replied. And when they see someone stand up for what's right, it gives them the courage to care even more. Maya nodded, her eyes thoughtful. I think I want to help people too when I grow up, she said quietly. Like you. James's heart swelled with pride, and he knelt beside her again. You already do, Maya, he said, kissing her forehead. You already do. With that, the two of them continued their walk through the park, their bond stronger than ever. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the park, and though the day had begun with adversity, it ended in triumph, a reminder that courage and kindness could always prevail. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.